It's something. It's something out there. It's a puzzle. And they don't let you know. I think they milk that for about 5 minutes, 4 minutes, telling you there's one more thing, and then concealing it from the audience until you finally get it. And that's the opportunity there for dramatic irony, because you may recall that when the troops realize it's not over, they try to radio and warn everybody that the kids are coming upstairs, and the radio goes out. So the toys don't know the kids are coming upstairs, and already they got you worried that their toys are going to be found out. And then at the last minute, they all take their positions, and the sequence is over. And it has that apparent resolution, then the real resolution, then you're done. First movie's over. 2 terms here: preparation by contrast and retardation. Useful to remember. Preparation is simply a scene or part of a scene that's used to prepare the audience with some expectation, usually either hope or fear. It's not a plot issue. You don't need these scenes for plot. You can get by without them. But they punctuate the movie. And preparation by contrast is preparing the audience for one outcome and then giving them a twist. And this is at the heart of this idea of making it not seem contrived. Because we get one outcome, and then we get the actual outcome. You just saw 2 movies in the space of 15 minutes. And in this case, they use preparation by contrast, and retardation is simply, it's like the dramatic pause. Making the audience wait for something. It builds the anticipation. Again, if you've seen The Fellowship of the Ring, a really good example in that movie is the arrival of the Balrog, this monster that comes a little over halfway through the movie. They don't tell you what it is. They say the word, but they don't show it. All you see are flames, and you hear it, and you feel the place rumble. But they don't show it to you for about 4 minutes. All they have is everybody's reaction to it. So that after 4 minutes, you're ready, man. You want to see this thing, and when they deliver big. So they're playing this game with the audience in that one. Buzz's arrival is the inciting incident or point of attack. When he arrives, Woody can't go back to normal. He's got to deal with it somehow. And the story is, we don't know what the story's about yet, but we got a sense of where it's going. And a point of attack is useful because it tells the audience that there is a point to this. You may have heard, you got to have your first act over with by the first 30 pages or so. And then you may say, but you don't have to. That's just a formula. Well, it's just a practical thing. That after about 30 pages, 30 minutes, the audience is literally going to start to wonder, where is this going? I don't get it. You want the audience to raise questions, but you want them to raise questions about what's going to happen, not, I don't get it, I'm lost. So the point of attack is helpful because it gives us a hint of where it's going before you actually get there. Okay, so he has to deal with it, and the whole thing, it runs 13 minutes, 40 seconds. So you got a short movie to start the movie. It's not the main movie, a story, it's just a beginning story. We are talking about sequence B. The first one, what makes it unified? Woody. What does he want? He wants to calm the toys down. It's all justified, it's all within there. And there's little variations in it, but it's a little story. Then, second sequence is unified by dramatic tension. Again, it's Woody trying to thwart Buzz's acceptance by the toys. It's a very short sequence. It runs maybe 6 minutes. It's different from the tension of the first sequence. It's a different movie. We haven't seen Buzz before, but it's not the main movie yet. It's really one scene or 2 at the most. It's Woody trying to challenge Buzz. Buzz is showing off, and probably the single biggest moment in it is this falling with style ride that Buzz takes. He brags that he can fly, and Woody says, no, you can't. And he proves it by jumping on a ball and tumbling around, and it almost looks like he's flying. So all the toys are impressed. So you have a negative resolution to the sequence. But Woody can't do anything about it. And at the end of it, you have a very strong dangling cause, where Woody looks, there's a close-up of him, which is often, this is movies, not screenplays, but in films you'll often see the end of the first act is marked by a close-up. The camera pulls in on the main character because it gets into the emotion of the main character, and he says, you'll see in a few days, everything will be the same. I'm still Andy's favorite toy. It's a prediction. And it dangles, it literally cuts right into, it's a dialogue hook that cuts right into the following sequence. And this film has, when we talk about acts in movies, It's different from theater in the sense you don't have a curtain between the acts. But Toy Story is one of those movies that has a curtain. It has a musical interlude. And the musical interlude is a montage of showing how Woody's prediction turned out not to be true. Andy starts using Buzz to beat up Woody in all these little games. So we get a negative answer to this dangling cause right off the bat. And this one, it runs about a little over 6 minutes. And it's the end of Act 1. We know whose story it is. We know what the obstacle is going to be. We know what he wants, which is to maintain his place at the top of the heap. We know what the obstacle is. It's going to be Buzz. The question is posed. Is he going to succeed in maintaining his spot or not? And that's what drives the action, and that's what we tune in for. The tension of the movie itself is echoed in the tension of the sequence C, which is Woody battling Buzz to be number one. And he tries the easiest solution first. He tries confronting him verbally. Then they try a fist fight. Then they try, at the end, if that doesn't work, he goes with a trick. You may remember he tries to trick Buzz into looking down at this lost toy that's trapped behind a desk. His plan is to knock him down there so he can go with Andy to the pizza parlor. And instead, Buzz gets knocked out the window. So his attempted solution to the problem creates a bigger problem that didn't exist before. Again, it's about a 9-minute sequence. It's punctuated by the introduction of Sid, this kid next door who's this creep, this horrible person, and who abuses toys. And here you have, as I say, character tries a simple solution, direct solution, trying to solve it. Within 9 minutes, he's much deeper than he thought, and he doesn't like it. The following sequence, sequence D, unified again by dramatic tension, you have Woody trying to get Buzz back home. That's a whole new story. We haven't seen that story. It didn't exist before. Now it exists. And you'll remember they go to this filling station, and then they get left behind. And while they're battling it out, a new opportunity arises, and they wind up being able to go to Pizza Planet, which is where the kid is supposed to be. And Woody manages to persuade Buzz to go to Pizza Planet. And his plan is to get Buzz back home, and Buzz, meanwhile, is deluded. He's off thinking he's going to save the universe. And at Pizza Planet, you have the first culmination of the story, this midpoint that I mentioned. It's a reasonable glimpse of the ending. You have a moment in the Pizza Planet where the stroller with the kid is pushing the stroller and the mom is there, and all they got to do is jump in there, and the movie is over. If not completely over, at least the problem of the sequence is solved. So you get a glimpse, it's almost over. And then, just at the moment when you think it's over, Buzz finds his way into this other, this vending machine, and Woody has to follow him, and they wind up getting picked up by Sid, the guy we've already met, and wind up at Sid's place after again, just under 10 minutes, this little segment of story. Woody fails. Negative resolution, and the midpoint, which is really a glimpse of the ending. It's success. They get home. But it doesn't materialize that way. The next sequence in it is unified again by dramatic tension. This is Woody and Buzz trying to get out of Sid's house. Very simple. It's an escape story. Again, it's not the whole story. This whole story is still about Woody maintaining his spot at the top. But the little story inside is about getting out of Sid's house. And you didn't have that story before. It didn't exist. Now it exists. And we know what the stakes are, because Sid blows toys up. Okay, they try to do that. It winds up with a negative resolution. In fact, now Buzz realizes that he's just a toy. He goes through a psychological crisis. And it's worse than it was. Because in the following sequence, Woody not only has to try to get back, but he has to try to persuade Buzz to get back. So his problem is even bigger. So at each step of the way, it's getting worse and worse, and the struggle deepens, and the stakes go up. All the way through this, you're reminded that there is a deadline, that the move is coming, and the move means that they have to do this by a certain time, or he'll never see home again. So there's a real use of all the different tools to create a greater emotional impact. Incidentally, when you've probably heard of the notion of comic relief in an intense drama. I don't know if you've heard of dramatic relief in a comedy, but comedies do have it. Successful ones do sometimes have a dramatic relief. And this is an example of that, where you have Randy Newman music, when it's kind of melancholy sound, and you've got Buzz realizing he's just a toy and he fails to fly, and the camera is looking down at him, and it's really not a comedy at all. And what it does is it gives you a break from the laughter. Because you ever notice that comedies are usually about 90 minutes and rarely more than 2 hours? Whereas sometimes dramas go on for 2 to 3 hours or more. There's a reason for that. Comedies actually require exertion from the audience. You can get physically tired when you're laughing. So you do need to give the audience a break. I mean, you're very lucky if you've got a movie that people are laughing at, I guess. But if you are successful, you need to give them a break from the laughter. Because if the audience gets tired, it stops looking funny, and it starts looking stupid. You don't want that. So this is one option, is you can relieve the audience with an interlude like this. The key is not to make it last so long that you lose the thread of comedy altogether. In this case, it's maybe about 7 minutes where it's really despair, and then they take you out of it. But the end of this sequence, this is the one just before the end of the second act. It starts out with Woody really trying to solve this. You even have a scene, you may recall, where Woody throws this Christmas lights across the yard into the window of Andy's place. And you really get another glimpse of the ending. Because all he's got to do is have the other toys tie it down, and then they can get across, and the movie's over. And he almost persuades them to do it, and then the suspicions arise, and the toys refuse to do it, and everything goes down the drain, and you have a reversal again. So the storytellers are playing this game of hope and fear with you. So negative resolution is Buzz is strapped to a rocket, Woody's trapped under a milk crate, and this is one of those all is lost type end of second acts. And this is where the moment of truth comes for the main character. He realizes, he concedes, he can't do anything about this. He's not as cool as Buzz. Buzz will get Andy's love. There's nothing he can do about it. And that's where the moment, man's extremity is God's opportunity. You know, now he sees what he couldn't see before. And from that moment, the story's over. We no longer are asking, is Woody going to get his spot back at the top? It's moot. He doesn't care anymore, and he's come to a new realization. So that story's over. A new story starts. And you'll often see this. At the end of the second act, you get a whole new tension comes up, which is called the third act tension. And in this case, it is, will they get, the two of them team up and get out again in time for the move? And the first, this is broken into two parts, unified by dramatic tension. Woody trying to use the caper with Sid's toys to spring Buzz. So it's like a 10-minute movie about an escape. And that's all it is. That's the focus of it. It's not about getting on the truck yet. It's about getting him out. And it's fully developed. It's not, you don't know ahead of time what the caper will be, but it's hinted. And this is third act stuff. If the movie was about a caper, then in the first act you get to learn about what they're going to do. And then during the course of the second act, they're going to do it. Because it's it happens late in the movie. There's no time to set it up. It'll ruin the pace. So you just get a hint of what's coming, and then they do it, and he gets out. And it comes it's played for surprise. Positive resolution at last. The first sequence where there's actually been a positive resolution. This is something else to keep in mind, that comedies, we think comedies are fun, but that doesn't apply to the characters in them. Characters are having a miserable time. The difference is that you're given permission by the storytellers in a comedy to distance yourself emotionally and laugh at them. It's called establishing the comic climate. And it happens early in this one. You have to do it early in comedies, otherwise they won't work. But once you establish that, you can get away with this, and we laugh. But Woody's had an absolutely terrible time. If you were to tell this story straight up, you'd say somebody's angry at him for putting him through this. But we finally get a positive resolution. Sequence runs about a little under 8 minutes. Then the final sequence is unified by dramatic tension once more. Woody and Buzz on that fabulous chase to get to the moving van before it's too late. And in this, everything is, I like to say this movie is firing on all 8 cylinders because they pull out all the stops. You got to see this picture if you haven't seen it. It's not only exciting because of the straightforward storytelling that's in it, but there's an element, there's a pattern in it that comes into play too, which is that the 2 enemies become friends. And there's some emotional charge that comes out of that. When you're battling this opponent all the way through, and he's formidable, Buzz, and then in the end they team up in a common cause, it's very exciting. It's exhilarating. And this ending literally soars. So you have the chase, you have a whole series of ins and outs, obstacles, you know, hope, fear, they're playing a game with you constantly, and then you have the positive resolution of the whole thing. They get back on, and then you have a brief epilogue, which carries you. The epilogue is there to give the audience a chance to catch their breath before they go outside into the theater. Or kitchen, if they're watching it at home. And the last sequence runs just under 10 minutes. So there you have it. You have the 8 sequences. Wasn't written, as far as I know, explicitly by sequence, but I think you can see in it that there are little stories in the big story, and a way of looking at all the variations by which you can examine a character's problem. And in the end, it's a really successful picture. It's rich in some other ways. I've talked about theme. Main character carries a theme. And he goes through this transformation. This is something called character arc, which is a whole other lecture. But it's the idea that there's a gap between what the character knows and what the character wants and what the character really needs. They're not aware of what they really need, which is to be at peace with being loved. What he wants is love. He thinks he can get it by doing something, but he can't. And when there's a collapse between those two, when there's a recognition of the problem, the theme comes out and the character changes. In this, you have other character arcs too. You have Buzz. Buzz is a guy who has a delusion. He thinks he's a superhero, and he's not. And his character has a culmination too. It's almost a subplot in a way, his little delusion. It's not a fully developed subplot, but it's there, and he goes through his transformation. And then Sid also has a transformation, the bad kid. He abuses toys, he's a serial abuser, and then he comes to a realization through that trick that it's the wrong thing to do, and he changes. So it's rich in all these different ways, and it's all for about 80 minutes of cinema. Very rich storytelling. Okay, now I want to talk about another movie that is a bit of a contrast. When this movie first came out, one of my students came up to me and he said, "You got to do an analysis of this movie. It's unlike any movie you have ever seen in your life." Okay, fine. Yeah, what do kids know, right? And then my wife saw it and I said, "Okay, what's the deal with this movie?" She said, "It's like Woody Allen on heroin." So I thought, well, let's look at this movie. And it is weird. And I don't know how many of you have seen it. How many people have seen Being John Malkovich? Okay, so a few of you have seen this. It's another one of these that's good to look at, not only for the writing viewpoint, but all the different craftsmen have shown up and done superlative work in support of the script. Everything is shown up, everything from makeup to the choice of the filters on the lenses, the set design, the way the performances are done. It really, everything comes together in this movie. And it's different. It is different. But is it a different kind of structure? And in this case, the answer is really no. It isn't. It just shows you how flexible the structure can be. But you still have, basically, you have a protagonist. You have Craig. And Craig is a guy who wants a girl. That's the most basic story there is. The guy wants a girl. It's unusual how he's going to go about getting her. He's going to go into business with her using a Malkovich portal. If you don't know this movie, a lot of the things I'm about to say may sound to you like I don't know what I'm saying. But when you see the movie, you'll understand. So, there's this Malkovich portal, right? I can imagine pitching this movie. Okay, there is this portal that goes into Malkovich. Anyway, he uses the Malkovich portal to get the girl. And that's what he wants all the way through. And then you have, the main tension is, will he get the girl or not? That's what pushes the movie along. despite the fact that it meanders a bit with all these bizarre little things, delightfully bizarre things. Then, end of the second act. What's the answer to the question? Remember when I said people think it has to be the low point, the end of the second act? Well, this is an example where that's not true. The end of the second act is when he gets the girl and he gets his career. He gets it all. The answer is positive. And then the third act is a comic exploration of the implications of what if John Malkovich was controlled by a puppeteer and decided to be a puppeteer. And they look at the comic implications of it, and then they come back to a subplot that kicks in later, and then you have the actual resolution, which is a mirror opposite, where he winds up, well, I hope I'm not giving this away too badly, but stop the tape here if you haven't seen the movie yet and watch it. But in the end, he winds up in hell, basically. He winds up trapped inside a body, and he can never look away even from the woman that he loves. You can't, he's trapped. So it's about, does the end of the second act have to be a low point? It depends on the terrain. If you end up high, then you might want it low. If you end up low, you probably want it high. Or you might want the middle to be high if it ends up low. Or you might, then it winds up in the middle. Tootsie is an example of a movie that the midpoint is the high point, and then the mirror opposite is at the resolution, and the end of the second act is halfway between. So it's kind of both. So it depends on the terrain. So you should be a slave to the material that you come up with, not to the formula. Just keep in mind the object of the game is to play with your premise and stretch it all the different ways and tease your audience and mess around with them. That's the game. Okay, Malkovich, is it made of little stories? Well, it is. It's a little trickier in some ways because there are a couple of subplots that kick in later. And when you have subplots, you have, sometimes the subplots are the whole sequence. And sometimes the subplot can be put in, becomes part of a sequence. And the way you knit the different sequences and scenes together is still the same. You use the dangling cause, you use the telegraphing, you tell us where it's going, and then it's called basically knitting and filling. You knit the scenes together and you fill them with action. Opening sequence, remember I said you got to try with an exterior and the long shot, get us oriented? Well, they're going to pull a trick on us. They start out with an interior long shot of a theater, and the curtains open and there's a puppet show going on. And for a good minute or so, there's this puppet show, and it turns out it actually is an interior close-up, which is also a good way to start a movie. But it does begin with a puzzle. It does, no explanation. They just got this thing going on with a puppet, and it's called, we learned that it's called Craig's Dance of Despair, and they have this Bartok music, which is very tense and dark music, and a guy throwing things around, and a little at a time, they pull back and they show there is a puppeteer up there, and you get a glimpse of what's happening. But it starts with that puzzle. Now, what's unusual about this, it is a comedy, but it has a different feel to it. A couple of reasons for that. One is that the music is, it's contrapuntal, it's contrary to, it works against the grain of a comedy. It's pretty dark stuff, it's very contemplative. And it's, then you have the fact that it doesn't even begin with a gag. Usually you gotta start with a gag in the first 30 seconds, or otherwise we don't know it's a comedy. In this case, it starts out with a pretty long opening with the puppets, and then you get the first gag with Orrin Hatch, the bird on top of Craig's head. That's the first gag. And then you get the sense that it's a comedy. Okay, so it starts out with the puzzle, classic thing, and then first gag. Soon thereafter, you hear his wife, Craig's wife, Lottie, say, "What about getting a job?" And there's your point of attack of the sequence. See, we haven't started the story yet. We're not even close to there yet. But we do have the first story, which is get a job. And again, it's the same thing where you have a task. You give the main character a task, and they struggle with it, and then by the end of it, they get it or they don't, one or the other. But you create empathy with the audience, with that character, by playing that little game. So here, will you get a job? There's a, no, I have to be a puppeteer. First attempt to make some money, he goes on the street, he does his puppeteering thing, he gets punched in the face, and then winds up back home, and he looks up, he gets through the want ads, applies for a job at Lester Corporation, Lester Corp, for a filer, and there you have, when he lands that job, about 10 minutes into the movie, you have the resolution of the sequence. And then it goes to orientation, that's when he meets the girl. So just at the end of that first little story is the beginning of the next story. They don't wait to the next one. They knit them together so that just before the end of the first part, you get a hint of where it's going to the next one. And you wind up with the point of attack, the girl, the presence of the girl, and the parent interest. Okay, the next sequence is about pursuing the girl. He, united by dramatic tension again, and it's going to be Craig trying to connect with this woman on the job, Maxine. It starts with Craig